Africa.
Back at it again with the punches pointed, y'all. Y'all know what the deal is. We're coming off of the Israel Adesanya versus the Dricus Du Plessis fight. Now, it's a lot to take into consideration. It's a lot to look into. Of course, in case y'all don't know, or if you may do know, Du Plessis won by fourth round submission. And what I would say in one of the most back and forth competitive type fights ever. I mean, the fight from the start, you could tell it was what me and Mario said it was going to be. I'm all about figuring it out. Who was going to establish their best strength? Who was going to be able to impel their will on the other fighter? Now, before I pass it over to Mario, I would like to say congratulations to Du Plessis. I don't want to sit here and say that me and Mario necessarily doubted him, but at the same time, though, we looked at it from a standpoint of, a lot of the time these fights does happen on feet, and sometimes a lot of them do end on feet. And we just felt like that maybe on a stylistic standpoint, knowing the standards to who has the better striking, that it would favor Izzy. But that did not happen. From what I had Israel Adesanya with the first round. I had Du Plessis with the second round. I had Izzy with the third, and of course, fourth round, I had Du Plessis. But that's not to say Israel Adesanya was actually turning up in the fourth round. What Israel Adesanya did from the start was kind of like what we said he was going to do. He was going to gauge the range. He kept sticking his hand out there, gauge his range, try to strike with him. And even we saw Du Plessis try to strike with Izzy. And we saw real quick that it didn't really go in Du Plessis' favor. Du Plessis realized right then and there that he was going to have to get this fight to the ground. Izzy was just a little bit too quick to the time. Now, there was times where Du Plessis caught him. I would say third, fourth, definitely in the fourth round, he was trying to push Izzy back, which I mentioned that if you could put pressure on Izzy, if you could get Izzy back to that cage, that could really much put him in uncomfortable positions. And it did. Because if you notice, before he got took down, Izzy was kind of up against that cage. And when Du Plessis came through with the shot, Izzy kind of backed up a little bit, which led to Du Plessis grappling him. Now we saw he first tried to grapple him. It didn't really go in favor, but Du Plessis, he stood true to his ground game and he made sure that he opposed his will on Izzy. Izzy, of course, props to you for getting in there and whatnot, but from round one, Du Plessis realized at the matter of the fact he could not stand with Izzy, and what he did was he mixed it up as Mario said. So shout out to Mario because Mario did call that, and he kept shooting for those takedowns. And there's, like I said, there was times and moments where Izzy had his moments and whatnot, and at the last moment, you just see Du Plessis charge at Izzy, takes him down, and submits him. But I'm gonna pass it over to my bro Mario. Mario, what's your thoughts on this fight? What was your whole thoughts from round one to the finish? What was going through your head from round one all the way to the fourth round?
Say anything, I do want to say shout out to Dricus Du Plessis on his first ever title defense, a successful title defense at that. Now, like you said, it went the way we kind of predicted it would go if it were to go in Dricus's favor. Now, I predicted that the winner was going to be in the fourth round. However, I thought it was going to be Izzy and I thought it was going to be a TKO. That clearly didn't happen. Here's what I noticed. Okay, both guys came in there with great game plans. And by the way, since we're already talking about what they did, let's talk about strategy and let's grade that real quick. All right. Both guys had a great strategy. Izzy's strategy was obviously to use his range, kind of figure that range out. And once he figures that out, uses striking to make Du Plessis uncomfortable. What I think Izzy could have did a better job at was possibly counterpunching. There were many times where it just didn't seem like Izzy would pull the trigger. And there were many times where instead of kind of staying in that pocket and using head movement, using good defense, it seemed like Izzy would run away too much. And that was a big issue in this fight. With a guy like Du Plessis, we talked about how underrated his striking was, just like we talked about how underrated Izzy's wrestling was. The problem is, with Du Plessis, even though he might not be on the same level of striking as Israel Adesanya, and not many people are, he still has good striking. And to me, when I saw Izzy backing up and running away, when Du Plessis would come forward, it showed me that Izzy might be taking a step back. You know, he might not be the same Izzy that defeated Robert Whitaker. He might not be the same Izzy that defeated Paulo Costa. He might not be the same Izzy that defeated Alex Pereira in that second fight. You know, and because the prime Izzy would have counterpunched him. The prime Izzy would have picked his shots and took advantage of it. I don't think Izzy did a great job of that. However, what I will say is what I respect about Izzy is Izzy used his striking and he went to the body. And that was something that we forgot to mention. And that was something that we didn't mention. And shout out to Izzy for that. He went to the body because he knows that when it comes to wrestlers, they rely on their wrestling and they rely on their cardio. So when you take away the cardio, you take away half of what a wrestler can do. So him going to the body and he was pressuring and punching that and striking that body extremely well during this fight. I got to give him all the credit in the world. In that first round, I had Israel Adesanya slightly getting the edge over Dricus. In the second round, Dricus wrestling really started taking over. And even though Izzy got out of uncomfortable situations, like I said, his wrestling takedowns and takedown defense at least is extremely underrated. Izzy was able to get up from very uncomfortable positions. He was caught in a submission attempt in the second round and he got out of it. He got up and he continued to strike on the feet. And I respect that about Izzy. The third round, I had Israel Adesanya winning that round. See, the thing is with Izzy, if you go look back at the stats, Dricus Du Plessis, he attempted 9 takedowns and he only landed 4. To me, that's not that bad for somebody like Israel Adesanya, who's just a striker. So when we go back and we look at that fight, I think Dricus did a very good job of, like we mentioned in the prediction episode, which by the way, we will be putting that into this video as well. I think he did a very good job of getting to the inside. Once he got to the inside, he took his shot and he was able to take Izzy down. And we know how good of a wrestler Dricus is. And I feel like that was something that Izzy prepared well for, but he didn't prepare good enough for. You see, like Izzy said, it was a uncalculated mistake. Come the fourth round, Dricus put the pressure on him, and like we said, it was that type of pressure that Sean Strickland put on him as well. It was that pressure where it's like, I don't care about strategy. I am going to charge at you full steam, and I am going to swing, and you are not going to have a chance to counterpunch. But instead of Izzy finding that shot to pick, instead of him moving his head or trying to bob and weave, instead of him putting his hands up, what did he do, Breezy? He started running. And when he ran, he turned his head. What happens when you turn your head? You get clipped. So he got clipped. He stumbled, picked himself back up, recovered, kept running, got clipped again. And then right after that, Dricus got him on the ground. And Dricus was like, all right, all the cardio I have left, I'm putting it right into this move right here. I am going to get on top of his back. I am going to get a hold of his neck like I did in the second round, except this time, I'm going to make sure he taps out. And that's exactly what happened. In my opinion, both of these guys' strategies, if you grade it on a scale of 1 to 10, I give them a 9. I think Dricus could have targeted the leg more. That's the only thing I go against Dricus for. But other than that, Dricus was holding his own in the striking game with Izzy after that first round, in my opinion. I think Izzy had the advantage in that. However, if you go look at the stats, Dricus held his own with him. You know, they were kind of neck and neck and even and all that type of stuff. However, Izzy's a more advanced striker. Actually, shout out to Izzy for that elbow that he threw as well. That was a pretty skillful move when he did that spinning elbow when he hit him. However, it didn't matter because Dricus would end up submitting him in the fourth round to defend his UFC middleweight championship. So overall, both of these guys, they put it on. And the strategy that both of these guys had, I mean, I give it a 9, man.
Give it a 9 also. I give it a 9. See, what people don't understand is that, like I said, it was an interesting matchup. You got a wrestler and you got a kickbox. So with Izzy, like I said, the only problem I had with Izzy, and I agree with Mario, is the running. You're in there with a guy who had already attempted to take you down earlier in the fight when you turned your back. You have already turned your back. He already took you down. He clipped you once. So immediately it's kind of like, okay, he's in a moment. He's not thinking, all right, what does Izzy do? What does Izzy do? If you want to back up, that's fine. Because you got to gauge that space. Okay. You got to make room between you and Du Plessis. I get that. But If you're going to make the room, make the room where you can kind of at least see him. I think it, it's kind of like with Frank Martin when he fought Tank Davis. Frank Martin was doing so great. He was doing so good. The problem was he got on the ropes. It's small little things that you don't think about in the moment because you're in the moment and it just happens so fast that when you do the mistake, by then it's too late. For Frank Martin, he got clipped, he got KO'd. Izzy, he got took down and he got submitted. I agree, it was a 9. Izzy came in there trying to fight like Izzy would fight. It's just he got in there with a guy who who brought the pressure to him, who knew how to mix it up too, and who had the ground game to actually keep him down. And not only that, and submit him. So I agree with you. 9.
And overall, since let's get straight to the excitement grade. Overall, I mean, this fight was an 8 in my opinion as far as excitement. I think it had a lot of good back and forth. I think we got to see the best out of each fighter, and I think at the end of the day, we got a finish. So overall, I mean, I think it was an 8. I think the only thing that stops it from being a 10, it was strategic. You know, a lot of people might want to bump it up to a 10, and I understand that. But as far as like a UFC standpoint, which by the way, we got to grade this off of a UFC standpoint. UFC and boxing is two different things. As far as excitement from a UFC standpoint, I'm not gonna come out here and call this the greatest UFC fight of all time and put it at a 10. I don't think it's going to be a top 10 greatest UFC fight of all time, but I do want to give it an 8 because I think we got to see the best out of each fighter. Each fighter displayed their skills in front of a big stage in Perth, Australia, and the outcome, it was very, very exciting. And again, I do want to say that in the first round, maybe it started off a little bit slow. However, it picked up and it sped up, and I do believe that that's what makes it an 8. So overall, as far as an exciting fight, I think both of these guys did their thing, and I think they definitely gave the fans a great show to walk away from and good memories from that show as well. Now, since we're in the Dricus Du Plessis era. So with that being said, I give it an 8 out of 10.
I give it an 8.5. You know, these guys had kind of been back at it in fourth, long behold. Then they had the conversation about the king of Africa, who's the real African. And I'm all for promotion. But Izzy, what was that Instagram post about? I did not need to open Instagram and see that. Okay. I no Diddy times 10, okay? No Diddy times 10. Okay. But as far as the trash talk, it was a lot of emotions into it. Of course, everybody know Du Plessis made Izzy cry. Now, I know what y'all thinking. And you know, when you're putting a lot of emotions into it, when somebody's have emotions tied in and you see true emotions coming out, that makes the fight even more bigger because now you're wondering, are they going to fight emotional? Are they going to keep their composure? Now, and that was another reason why I was like, maybe Izzy was going to win because we saw him very showing a lot of emotion when it led up to the Alex Pereira, the second fight in the UFC, not the other ones, but in the UFC, the second Alex Pereira fight. He showed a lot of emotions and whatnot. But and he ended up winning that fight. But I I guess he just couldn't, you know, turn it on at that time and moment. But I give it about an 8.5. You know, the play first of all, I did not know that Du Plessis could talk like that. First of all, let's go ahead and say he can talk on the mic. If you give him the mic, he can hold his own. Let's just go ahead and say that. Like props to Du Plessis for that because he can hold his own on the mic. But it was an 8.5. They was able to hold it on. Izzy had his fair share words to say to Du Plessis. Du Plessis had his fair share words to say to Izzy.
Like he gave all the points for hype, and which obviously we're gonna get to right now as far as like the hype of this fight and leading up to it. Overall, the lead up to this fight, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. I gotta give it I think I gotta give it an 8.5. The lead up and the hype to it, the build up, all that type of stuff, I gotta give it an 8.5. I'll say a 10 would be something like Connor versus Habib. A 10 would be something like John Jones versus Daniel Cormier. A 10 would be something like Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz. Y'all didn't think we could go back that far for the UFC, huh? Since we're just a boxing podcast. But we know our stuff, you know what I'm saying? Like, doesn't mean we touch up on boxing. Don't mean we're not UFC fans. We do respect and enjoy the sport. I don't think it was as crazy as that. And the UFC tried to give a promo about bad blood and talked about John Jones and Daniel Cormier and Khabib versus Conor McGregor. That is generational bad blood right there. Like to this day, John Jones and Daniel Cormier, do they have a better relationship now than they did back then? Yes. But do they have a great relationship? No. To this day, Conor McGregor and Khabib still can't stand each other. To this day, Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz still don't like each other. So when you really go and look at it, I don't think this fight is on that same exact pedestal. If we want to talk about hype, you could even put Kobe Covington versus Jorge Masvidal up there as well. That to me would be bad blood. That to me would be hype. There's a lot of fights that have a lot of great hype and impact to it. And there's also fights that where you see two legends go head to head with each other that don't have bad blood, and you just want to see the best come out of both of them. In my opinion, a perfect example of that is Amanda Nunes versus Valentina Shevchenko. That's a great one. Two very successful women fighters, with Chris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes for the women. Now, if you want to go all the way to the men, you can go to, for instance, Henry Cejudo versus like Aljamain Sterling, or if you wanted to really kick it up a notch, Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier. There's a lot of different examples where you get two legends who don't have bad blood and they just want to be the best at their very sport. Did you have one in mind, Breezy? You're really thinking about it.
Absolutely. Pereira and Izzy.
Pereira and Izzy, perfect example right there. So when you really look at it, doesn't mean fighters don't have bad blood, does not mean it doesn't have big hype. But in this case, it had a lot of hype, a lot of build up. We're talking about two guys who are representatives of the country of Africa. We're talking about Dricus mentioning Izzy's background. We're talking about Izzy mentioning Dricus' background. I mean, it got personal. It really did. But at the same time, I couldn't put it up there with those type of caliber fights as far as impact, hype, and build up. So I'm going to give it an 8.5.
I give it about an 8. Like I said, of course you had the whole, situation with the I'm the king of Africa. I'm the king of Africa. It's that typical argument. It's like you just sitting there watching a show. It's like, no, I'm the baby dad. No, I'm the baby dad. No, I'm the baby dad. Okay. It's one of those conversations where it's like, hey, no, it's me. It's me. It's me. I'm the real truth. No, 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 no. And, it has its hype. It has its impact. It has its excitement. But it's not like, I mean, because there's so many different backgrounds of fighters in the UFC. I mean, we'll be sitting right here trying to name them all. I believe, look, there could be greats in all different backgrounds: black, white, British, Hispanic, Asian, African, Nigerian. So I never really kind of like played it to it, but we know that was kind of like the whole theme of this whole fight is who's the real African king and all that and stuff like that. So I give it about a 8.
You got to be a 10. I mean, we're talking about Dricus Du Plessis, the current UFC middleweight champion, defeating possibly the greatest UFC middleweight champion of all time while he's still in that later stage of his prime. We're talking about Dricus being an underdog, defeating the favorite in Israel Adesanya. We're talking about it being done in Izzy's hometown, or technically not his hometown because he's from New Zealand, but regardless, we're talking about him doing it in Perth, Australia, which is where a lot of Izzy's fans reside. We're talking about it being in the main event under the brightest lights. Now you really go and look at the UFC now. Now Dricus is probably going to be in that pound for pound, and Dricus has already set himself up for the Dricus Du Plessis era, which I think we're about to head into. Now all of a sudden we can get so many matchups and so many guys that maybe Izzy beat in his prime that could possibly get another shot at the title. For instance, Paulo Costa could be one guy. Another example could be Robert Whitaker can get a rematch. Obviously, Sean Strickland deserves a rematch for sure. And then there's one guy, in my opinion, that I think could definitely get another shot at that title. And it's a guy a lot of people forgot about. Me and Breezy talked about it off stream. I think Marvin Vettori has the best shot of beating a guy like Dricus Du Plessis. And that might kind of stir a lot of people the wrong way and kind of mix it up. But the way I look at it is Marvin Vettori fought Israel Adesanya twice. He never got knocked out, and he lost by unanimous decision. Marvin Vettori does a great job of protecting himself. Plus, he's got a very good wrestling background. I do think that his style is something that could definitely trouble Du Plessis. I wanted to find the right word. It's definitely a style that could trouble Du Plessis and could, make him work a little bit. So I'd like to see that fight. Now we'll get to that a little bit later as far as upcoming fights. But if we're talking about the impact on how it not only affects the division but the UFC, I got to give it a 10. And Dricus Du Plessis just started his legacy at 305 by defeating Israel Adesanya by submission, remind you. So shout out to Dricus.
I agree. 10. I told Mario yesterday, I said, man, when Usman lost the belt, it was crazy enough because none of us, I don't care what y'all say, none of us saw Usman losing that belt, and especially in that fashion. How many people? Okay, well, let me watch that statement because some of y'all did say he will lose by submission, but for the vast majority, how many of y'all can confidently say when you first saw this matchup on paper, you said Du Plessis was going to submit him? How many of y'all said that? I didn't say that. It didn't even occur to my mind. But I knew the guy had great ground game. I just didn't think he was going to submit easy. I honestly thought that the fight was going to be more standard, if anything. But to nevertheless to say anything else is that I give it a 10. I mean, like you said, the Du Plessis era. And when it titles constantly change and whatnot, new face, new name, which means it makes for different styles of fights, different matches. And like Mario say, who knows? We could get Du Plessis fighting some of the guys that Izzy fought, and you never know. Those guys may be able to want to have Du Plessis' number. You never know. This is why styles make fights, and this is why we say that it opens. This is why I don't be too upset when a fighter becomes champion because it's kind of like you're not necessarily you hate or dislike seeing somebody continue winning the belt or the champion, but it's like when somebody else wins, you open yourself to see a different kind of stylistic matchup. And the fact that he said yesterday, Marvin Vettori, I actually thought about that. I was like, yo, that low key would actually be a nice little matchup. So low key, I'm hoping that we can get that fight. I'm hoping somewhere down the line Marvin Vettori comes up, gets a win, and we get Vettori and Du Plessis.
Can't forget about the guys sliding up to middleweight a little bit too. Kamaru Usman's making a little bit of a move to middleweight. And last but not least, there is one guy who continues to terrorize the UFC, and we completely forgot about him, and his name is Hamzat Shamayev. And that is the guy that everybody in the middleweight division is going to have to look out for, because I'm telling you this right now, Breezy. He wins that belt, I don't think anybody's taking it away from him.
We're forgetting just one more guy, and he spoke just the other day. Alex Pereira. He did say he wanted to come back down. So I don't know how true that is, but if he comes back down, that would be something crazy.
I like Alex Pereira, but from going from light heavyweight all the way down to middleweight, that to me might be a little too much of a weight drain. But I mean, he could possibly do it. Who knows? And then last but not least is one guy. He's kind of a fan favorite. I like Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns might be a guy, that could get a nice little shot at Dricus Du Plessis. Overall, there's so many matchups now that you can make now that excuse me, my bad. Gilbert is a welterweight. Okay, Gilbert's a welterweight. I'm not even gonna cut that out. I make mistakes, but if Gilbert did want to make that step up, I do think that's an interesting matchup. There's so many things you can do. Now, since we got a new champion, now we can finally start looking at all of those different styles and all those different matchups, and we can actually, it's almost like a refresh button for the middleweight division. It was entertaining when Izzy was champion. And then he lost to Strickland. Now it's kind of a refresh button. But out of all the names that we mentioned, Breezy, who do you think should get the next shot at Dricus Du Plessis?
I get Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland. I think almost every UFC fan can agree that Sean Strickland does. I mean, I thought he did have the belt, and it's like He took one loss, which we could obviously say that it was a little bit of a close fight in a way. So it's only right that the guy that just lost his belt is going to get the champion of out of Izzy and Du Plessis. So that I think that's the obvious fair answer would be Sean Strickland.
Sean Strickland deserves next up. And again, it was a very close fight. I do think that it was close enough for him to earn a rematch. And overall, I do think that him versus Dricus Du Plessis, every single time they fight, I do think it's going to be a very entertaining fight. Just again, going back to style, we got the rough around the edges, rugged boxer and Sean Strickland versus the pressure wrestler with underrated striking and Dricus Du Plessis. So I do think that when those two fight, I do think it's going to be another good fight. Now, before we hop off, Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. Yes, we graded this fight along with the rest of the boxing fights that we have reacted to, and Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya is ranked number 2 on our list with a score of 8.88. The only fight that's ranked above that is still the number 1 fight that is going to be very, very hard to beat, Breezy, and that is Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk at 9.48. But Dricus Du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. Congratulations for being ranked the second best fight that we have graded on the Puncher's Point. Now, with that being said, it's time for us to wrap it up. Breezy, take it away.
We live active every week, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and some Saturdays, and even some Sundays. If you're lucky enough to be active to catch us, y'all know what the deal is. The Puncher's Point has been another episode. Y'all was not ready for no UFC episode. That's why we snuck up on y'all like a ninja with this one. But that's why y'all supposed to be tuning into the X, the Instagram, and the podcast. Y'all tune into the podcast app. All right. It's much, much quicker. I'm pretty sure if you got a phone or whatnot and you watch a YouTube and you put your phone in your pocket, sometimes you move around and your pocket touches a screen and it clicks off to a different video. You ain't got to worry about that on the podcast app at all. Okay. So feel free to still tune into the podcast app. We still post on the podcast app. All right. Don't leave it feeling alone. Go watch it. Go sit on there too.
Back.
But
And most of y'all be working at warehouses, most of y'all be working at stores, most of y'all be working in very quiet environments where you could just pop an earbud in and listen to the Puncher's Point on the podcast. So make sure y'all go tune into the Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, wherever you can find a podcast, we are on there. Trust me when I tell you. So with that being said, Breezy, finish the words.
y'all know what the deal is. It's the Puncher's Point. Like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure y'all stay on point with the Puncher's Point.